There are things in history that were born merely to patch over a fleeting moment of chaos. A hasty decision, a makeshift solution, a habit established, just to keep things from getting messy, for a few days, a few weeks. Yet, in a strange and inexplicable way, they do not disappear. They cling to people, they cling to society, becoming traditions, laws, and sometimes even the tragedies that shape the fate of entire kingdoms. The Middle Ages was an era where the temporary endured the longest. In this video, you will step into a world where spontaneity becomes system, mistakes become custom, and decisions that seemed harmless quietly change the course of history. From peculiar customs and irrational laws to the tearful stories of Mary Tudor, and the grand yet fragile dreams of Alexander the Great, each of these reveals a single truth: sometimes, it is the temporary that haunts humanity the longest. Let us open the door to the past, to discover those things that should have vanished, yet continue to exist to this very day. And from here, as the door to the past has opened, we move deeper into the foundation of the entire matter, the nature of humanity when faced with the temporary. To understand why makeshift solutions can outlast the very people who created them, we must begin by looking at something profoundly human: the fear of chaos, the desire for stability, and the way we unknowingly turn the fleeting into the eternal. In every era, especially the Middle Ages, people constantly confronted sudden crises, failed harvests, plagues, wars, power struggles, or simply a hasty decision to solve the problems of the next day. Society at that time did not operate on long-term planning or foresight. It operated on the instinct for survival. And when survival was the highest priority, temporary solutions were always the first choice. People in the Middle Ages lacked the information, tools, and organization to address problems at their root. They had no modern science, no coherent administrative systems, no strategic planners. When a crisis occurred, the most natural response was to implement a temporary measure to keep everything from collapsing. A makeshift bridge, a hurried law, an unconsidered ritual, a custom created to fill a gap, these were initially just patches. No one imagined they would last long enough to become tradition. But here, human nature began to reveal itself. People dislike change. Change carries risk, effort, and uncertainty. The new creates worry. Will it work? Will it make things worse? Will I be held responsible if it fails? So, when a temporary solution persisted for a while, however irrational, costly, or inefficient, it was retained simply because it worked. People cling to familiarity like a lifeline. They gradually see it as natural, as if it had always been there. What was initially temporary, over time, becomes how things have always been. And eventually, people forget why it existed. They remember only the method, not the purpose. What is even more remarkable is that this temporariness is contagious. One hasty decision can lead to 3 more, made to adjust, patch, or prevent further consequences. Each correction forms a new layer of habit. Layer upon layer accumulates, like building a house from makeshift bricks, with no one remembering why the original wall was built in the first place. The temporary nature of humanity is also linked to another factor: the habit of reinterpreting the past to justify the present. A strange custom or rule passed down through generations is given new meaning by later generations: religious, moral, traditional, or simply, our ancestors did it this way. At this point, a makeshift solution officially becomes a legacy. In medieval society, this process was stronger than in any other period. The world then lacked rational governance and was overrun by instinct. Life was shaped by fear, superstition, and heavy reliance on the community. Therefore, when an entire village or town collectively adopted a temporary solution, it immediately gained legitimacy. Social consensus turned the temporary into the official. Imagine a small village. To deal with wild animals in winter, they hung bells on their livestock. The purpose? To hear the bells and know if the herd wandered too far. It was only a solution for one harsh winter. But the next year, they still hung the bells. And the year after that as well. Gradually, the sound of the bells became a familiar sound across the region. Children grew up with it, seeing it as a symbol of the season. No one remembered that it had been created merely to prevent disaster during a particularly harsh winter long ago. And so, from a temporary tool, the bell became a social signal, a ritual, a part of culture. Later generations assigned it new meanings, religious, auspicious, or symbolic of order. Thus, the temporary crossed the boundary of time to become an enduring tradition. In medieval legal and administrative life, this phenomenon was even clearer. When a problem arose, such as a trade dispute, a local judge would issue a temporary rule to resolve it. The goal was only to settle the matter for that day. Yet the rule was recorded, applied again, and again. By the time society changed, the rule was still considered law. And no one wanted to tamper with the law, for to amend it meant shouldering responsibility. Once something became law, even if created hastily, it carried authority beyond reason. People accepted it because they believed it was ancient, venerable, and linked to order. In medieval society, what was old was sacred, what was long-standing was right. Thus, the passage of time inadvertently became a fine cloak draped over decisions that were initially insignificant. But the deepest root of human temporariness lies in psychology: fear. Fear of change, fear of chaos, fear of responsibility, fear of being isolated for doing something different. Fear that removing a habit would leave society without a foundation. Fear that trying something new would push life into unforeseen risk. It is this fear that drives people to act according to habit, regardless of logic. And it is precisely because of these psychological and social mechanisms that the Middle Ages became the perfect stage for temporary measures to be born, persist, and grow. Society at that time resembled an old wooden cart. When something broke, they patched it with a plank. No one dismantled the entire cart to rebuild it. They just patched it. And over time, these patches shaped the form of the cart. All of this did not occur only in customs, laws, or communal life, it also shaped the fate of historical figures. Decisions that seemed relevant only for a few weeks or months became forces that defined the lives of people recorded in history. Mary Tudor is a prime example. Born from a temporary decision, raised amidst temporary rifts, and becoming a queen with a soul wounded by circumstances that should never have endured. But before we delve into Mary's story and the tragedies that makeshift solutions brought upon her, we must understand this: every historical tragedy originates from human choice. And sometimes, the most dangerous choice is not a grand conspiracy, but a small decision made in a moment, left to persist through generations. This is the essence of human temporariness, and why it always endures longer than we imagine. And once we see through human nature, with its fear of change, its tendency to turn makeshift solutions into tradition, we can better understand the environment that nurtured this mechanism. For temporariness does not reside solely within individuals, it is embedded in an entire society operating on inertia. From here, the story expands. If humans allow the temporary to endure, then it is the Middle Ages where inertia transformed fleeting measures into collective destiny. The Middle Ages was an era in which every system was built through reaction rather than strategic thought. Life was fraught with uncertainty, wars could break out at any moment, natural disasters struck with no scientific explanation, plagues spread without medical control. In such circumstances, people could only cling to what was familiar, old enough, and safe enough to carry them through the next day. And so, inertia became the operating principle of society. Medieval social inertia functioned almost instinctively. Once something was done and did not immediately cause disaster, it became the default choice. No verification, no reasoning, no improvement was needed. As long as it made life less complicated, people continued to use it, as if it were the only way to survive. A prime example of this was the legal system. Many medieval laws were not created to establish long-term order but merely to resolve a specific case, a land dispute, a stolen chicken, a conflict between two merchant guilds. The local judge issued a rule to settle the matter that day. Yet, instead of disappearing as originally intended, the rule was copied, applied, recorded in books, and over time became law. Inertia made later generations accept it as immutable truth, even though no one remembered why it had been created. The same applied to customs. A ritual might be created for a very small reason, such as warding off spirits during a plague or marking a poor harvest year, but after a few seasons, people began to believe that skipping the ritual was taboo. Inertia dictated, ancestors did it, so we must do it too. And thus, an initial whim was preserved as a sacred symbol. Even physical infrastructure of the time was a product of inertia. Roads were formed by footsteps and wagon wheels, with no planning. Day after day, people followed the old paths, even if they were winding, muddy, or dangerous. No one considered opening a straighter, better road. For to open a new path meant change, and change meant risk. And so, inertia was the safest path. In the economy, this was equally evident. Trade relied entirely on traditional patterns. Markets opened on the same day, in the same place, trading only familiar goods. If there was an excess of fish one day, there was no way to change the market day or move its location. Inertia formed unchanging patterns, confining the economy to old cycles. Interestingly, the lack of literacy and reliance on oral transmission made inertia even stronger. When knowledge was preserved in collective memory rather than in books, people could not analyze why a habit existed. They only knew it existed, long enough to become correct. Thus, what was initially temporary was handed down as truth, and no one could trace its roots. Yet inertia was not accidental. It was tightly bound to the collective psychology of the time, fear. In an era where death lurked constantly, from disease, war, and famine, people believed that change could disrupt the fragile balance of society. A custom, a law, or a social procedure, no matter how irrational, at least provided a sense that things were stable. People preferred to continue being wrong than risk trying something new. This created a world where stagnation was seen as safe, repetition as right, and even the most illogical practices could become natural law. In a sense, the Middle Ages was a world that bound itself with its own inertia. Looking deeper into everyday life, inertia appears in the most ordinary details. Taverns scattered across villages always had straw-covered floors, not because it was the best option, but because every tavern has done it for ages. Even if the straw was dirty, flammable, and prone to decay, it was kept. Removing it would disrupt the familiar image of a tavern, and that alone was enough for the community to resist. Or consider placing the kitchen inside the main living space. Full of smoke, fire risk, and poor hygiene. Moving it outside meant building more, spending more, and, more importantly, changing a family model that had existed for hundreds of years. Inertia dictated, the old way, though flawed, was safe. Inertia was also why many of the both absurd and charming customs of the Middle Ages endured. People gave each other playful nicknames, Bald John, Little Tom, Crooked Peter, and over generations, these nicknames became surnames. What began as a whim of the community, once used for several generations, became a legal identifier. What started as a joke turned into a family legacy. Inertia also made society closed off. When everyone did the same, they were easier to accept and less likely to dispute. Anyone daring to act differently was seen as a threat. In this way, inertia acted as an invisible social control. It prevented people from asking questions. But operating by inertia had an even more serious consequence. It trapped society in patterns that no longer fit. When the world changed, weather shifted, politics shifted, technology shifted, inertia kept everything the same. Many problems that could have been solved through reform were left untouched until they erupted into major crises. It was in such an environment that personal tragedies, like that of Mary Tudor, could occur. Society then was not flexible enough to correct mistakes as they arose. Temporary decisions became long-term political structures. Personal wounds became national policy. Inertia transformed what should have lasted only a season into the fate of an entire dynasty. And when we understand the inertia of the Middle Ages, we realize that many historical tragedies were not born from malice, but from fear of change. Not because people wanted to maintain error, but because they lacked the courage to break from the familiar. That was the Middle Ages. A world governed by inertia, stagnant yet enduring, chaotic yet unified, absurd yet strangely human. And it was this same inertia that laid the foundation for peculiar systems, endearing mistakes, and half-tragic, half-comic stories that would continue to emerge in the following chapters. And as we delve deeper into the overall picture of a society governed by inertia, we realize that this inertia did not merely produce stagnation, it also nurtured a world full of spontaneity. Where small mistakes, hasty decisions, and makeshift solutions not only persisted but developed into a vibrant ecosystem, sometimes quirky, yet full of life and unexpectedly humorous. From here, we move into the next part, exploring the spontaneous ecosystem of medieval life, a universe where errors become endearing, and everything, however irrational, has its reason for existence. If the Middle Ages were a vast painting drawn with the strokes of inertia, then each detail, each object, each action was a splash of spontaneous color. Here, spontaneity was not disorder, it was how people coped with life through optimistic creativity, even if the results sometimes produced mistakes, absurd customs, or decisions that would amuse future generations. From technology, laws, and customs to personal life, all formed a living universe in which careful observers could marvel at its peculiar logic. First, let us look at early communication technology. In the Middle Ages, there were no newspapers, no telegraphs, and certainly no internet. Yet information still had to travel, from village to city, from court to common people. The messengers were living media. Initially, they simply shouted a few words to warn or convey important news. What seemed makeshift, shouting a few times a day, over the years became a serious profession, recognized and gradually evolving into a reliable communication system. It may sound whimsical, but without those initial shouts, information would not have spread far, and medieval society would have been far more chaotic. Next is ancient positioning technology, or in other words, simple human creativity to avoid getting lost. Bells were hung on everything, livestock, bridges, market stalls. At first, the purpose was to indicate distance, location, or danger. But over time, these bells became an integral part of daily life, creating the distinctive sounds of each region, becoming part of rituals during festivals, and even influencing architectural fashion. Small objects, seemingly harmless, became cultural markers lasting centuries. If technology made life convenient, then irrational justice and laws illustrate how spontaneity turns into order. Bread laws, market laws, minor prohibitions, all were originally created to address specific issues. A stolen loaf of bread, a noisy gathering, or a minor market dispute, each was handled with a temporary rule. Yet over time, these laws did not vanish. They were copied, applied in other cases, and became enduring, living laws. The absurdity lies in the fact that a law created for a small event could outlast the dynasty that issued it. And that is the charm of medieval life. Mistakes could last forever. Primitive hygiene solutions also provide a vivid example. In taverns and kitchens, straw was spread across the floors, not for cleanliness or aesthetics, but because it was an effective way to keep warm and prevent slipping. Kitchens were sometimes poorly located, resulting in smoke, dust, and food odor spreading everywhere, but changing them meant extra costs or disrupting familiar ways of life. These mistakes, while inconvenient, became part of the identity of the Middle Ages, endearing, humorous, yet full of life. A small yet symbolic detail is how people identified themselves with teasing nicknames. Bald John, Little Tom, Crooked Peter, names born from village jokes or physical traits gradually became official surnames. This shows that spontaneity was not only present in material objects or rules but also embedded in human identity, creating cultural marks that endured through generations. Even geography and urban planning were influenced by spontaneity. Roads, cities, moats, many were formed without plans or drawings, simply because temporary settlers or passing travelers created paths, built ditches, or erected temporary structures. Over time, what began as spontaneous improvisation became fixed infrastructure, shaping the appearance of medieval towns. All these details together created a special ecosystem. Spontaneity and mistakes coexisted, turning the irrational into the normal, inadequacies into culture, and personal errors into social legacy. This was the medieval universe, where people lived by intuition, produced endearing mistakes, and witnessed them persist for generations without concern. And it is from this universe of charming errors that we can better understand two major historical stories, the tragedy of Mary Tudor and Alexander the Great's dream of East-West harmony. What we see is that not only individuals were affected by the temporary, but entire societies and systems operated on spontaneity without long-term planning. Mary was trapped in temporary decisions, while Alexander tried to create a temporary order to maintain harmony. And the most wonderful, endearing aspect is this: within that spontaneity, within mistakes that seemed meaningless, history still produced vivid stories, profound lessons, and images that make later generations both laugh and reflect. Through this lens, the Middle Ages is no longer merely an era of suffering and chaos but a vibrant ecosystem, where the absurd becomes charming, and the temporary can endure longer than anyone could imagine. Those seemingly small details. A bell, a minor rule, a teasing nickname, all contributed to the complete picture of the Middle Ages. A universe in which, upon closer inspection, spontaneity is not irrational, and mistakes are not entirely wrong. On the contrary, they are proof of human resilience, creativity, and endearing charm in a world full of uncertainty. And once we understand how everything operates in this spontaneous ecosystem, the great stories of power, love, faith, and failure come to life more vividly than ever, opening the door to the aged eyes and ideals that history has left behind. And having wandered through the spontaneous ecosystem of medieval life, where endearing mistakes, makeshift decisions, and sudden bursts of creativity became part of culture and social infrastructure, we begin to perceive a larger question: why did these things, initially meant to be temporary, have the capacity to survive across centuries? Why did the makeshift, created merely to solve an immediate problem, transform into something eternal, becoming tradition, law, and sometimes even a sacred symbol of civilization? It is at this point that we enter a deeper analysis of the nature of tradition, where the temporary becomes permanent, where history preserves both spontaneity and small mistakes, and where humans learn to cling to the familiar rather than the correct. Tradition does not arise from perfection or pure reason. It emerges from the need to cling, from the fear of change, and from the very social inertia we have just explored. In the Middle Ages, where everything was guided by intuition and reflex, tradition was the natural result of repeatedly performing actions, whether irrational or inadequate, that people deemed safe. A custom, a law, or a habit originating from a temporary solution, if repeated long enough, ceases to be temporary. It becomes a standard, a template that everyone follows without questioning its original reason. The first thing to recognize is the absence of mechanisms to abolish laws and habits. In the Middle Ages, there was no modern system to reassess the effectiveness of a rule, custom, or practice. No authority existed to review, analyze, or remove what no longer fit. When a solution endured for a time, it was automatically considered valid. No one took responsibility for eliminating it, and thus the temporary naturally became fixed. Next is the community's preference for stability. In a society where death lurked at every corner, from disease, war, or famine, stability was more valuable than correctness. Medieval people chose to retain the familiar because, at least, it allowed them to predict the future and reduce fear. Even an irrational custom, an unreasonable regulation, or an outdated habit, if applied across generations, would continue to be maintained, because changing it might lead to chaos. In this world, familiar mattered more than right. Religious belief also played a crucial role in transforming the temporary into the eternal. Religion in the Middle Ages governed all aspects of life, laws, rituals, morals, and personal behavior. A custom, if sanctified or associated with religious belief, immediately gained authority beyond ordinary logic. People dared not change it, for fear of violating taboos or offending the divine. And so, what was originally a temporary solution was suddenly cloaked in sacred significance, ensuring it survived far longer than anyone imagined. Another mechanism that prolonged the temporary is the psychology of forgetting the original reason. When a habit or law is repeated over generations, people gradually forget its initial purpose. What remains are only the forms, behaviors, and rules. A seasonal ritual, originally meant to prevent crop failure, could become a significant religious ceremony. A market rule initially designed to settle a temporary dispute could gradually become fixed law. This forgetfulness transforms the finite into the infinite, turning spontaneity into norm. Tradition also persists through the communalization of behavior. When a decision is repeated many times and followed by many people, it becomes a social standard. No one wants to stand out, because difference entails risk, conflict, and isolation. The community creates a protective mechanism for the familiar, and thus the makeshift is legitimized through collective consensus. Consider everyday examples in medieval society. Bells on livestock, straw spread across tavern floors, kitchens placed in inconvenient spots, all originated as temporary solutions, as improvisation, or as mistakes. Yet over time, these objects and habits became norms, bells became rituals and symbols, straw on the floor became traditional decor, and kitchen placement became a characteristic image of the home. From a modern perspective, these small details seem both absurd and charming, but they formed the backbone of medieval culture. And this is the essence of tradition: the temporary survives, spontaneity is made eternal, and the irrational becomes normative. This also explains why many political decisions, even those with a temporary or personal nature, could affect entire dynasties. Mary Tudor is a prime example. The decisions of Henry VIII, initially meant to solve temporary needs of succession and politics, resulted in permanent consequences for Mary's life. The makeshift choices of her father became long-lasting pain, ultimately shaping her reign, firm, absolute, and sometimes ruthless. Tradition does not live only in rules or rituals, it lives in decisions, in suffering, and in mental habits maintained by society and individuals across generations. Moreover, the nature of tradition demonstrates the power of replicating old solutions. A temporary solution successfully applied in one place would be copied and applied elsewhere, even under different circumstances. This replication made the makeshift common, and with each iteration, it was reinforced. Looking back, we see that what seemed small actually possessed extraordinary vitality. It needed no profound reason, no long-term plan, just temporary effectiveness, and it would endure. Most importantly, tradition survives through its ability to transform the individual into the collective. A habit formed by a single person or a small group, if it met communal needs, would quickly spread and become a social norm. When everyone followed it, the temporary became permanent, and people learned to live by it, despite knowing that its original purpose was merely provisional. Looking at tradition this way, we uncover a profound truth. The eternal does not necessarily arise from perfection, but from repetition, familiarity, belief, and fear of change. Makeshift practices endure not because they are correct, but because humans choose to preserve them, follow them, and pass them on to future generations. Tradition is a magical combination of history, psychology, and inertia, where the temporary becomes eternal, and history is recorded through details that may seem trivial but carry immense power. And this understanding forms the foundation for delving into personal stories, where tradition, makeshift solutions, and social inertia combine to create vivid tragedies and ideals, from the tragedy of Mary Tudor to Alexander the Great's dream of East-West harmony. By grasping the essence of tradition, we see that history is not merely a sequence of events, but a delicate network of small decisions, endearing mistakes, and habits that, though seemingly insignificant, outlast human lives. And once we understand the nature of tradition, realizing that the temporary not only persists but is reinforced by inertia, psychology, and religious belief, the next step is to see the individuals directly affected by this mechanism. No longer are we speaking of abstract rules or customs, but of specific fates, where the temporary nature of power, politics, and provisional decisions shapes lives and souls. And no one illustrates this phenomenon more clearly than Mary Tudor. A life molded by the temporary politics around her. Mary Tudor was born into a turbulent dynasty, where power was measured by the ability to make swift, temporary decisions, often aimed solely at solving an immediate problem. Her father, Henry VIII, embodied a freewheeling, authoritarian, and provisional politics. Decisions he initially made to satisfy personal needs or short-term political advantages became obstacles and destinies that stretched across Mary's life. Her story is not that of an ordinary queen, but the tragedy of a person weighed down by history and power, where temporary decisions became a chain of permanent consequences. From her earliest years, Mary suffered the effects of a temporary political decision. Henry VIII desired a male heir to secure the Tudor throne. This led to the decision to divide the family, separating Mary from her mother, Catherine of Aragon. Initially, this was merely a political solution to legitimize a new marriage and secure power. But for Mary, it was her first loss, a loss that could not be replaced or compensated. Children need love and stability. Mary lost both because of her father's temporary political decision, a decision made for political purposes, yet with lifelong repercussions. The sense of temporariness continued to haunt Mary throughout her childhood. Religious shifts, from Catholicism to Anglicanism, and the removal of her mother's rights forced Mary to grow up in an unstable environment, both in faith and in affection. What had begun as a temporary solution to legitimize power became a deep wound in her soul. Mary became the product of political decisions, molded by what should have existed only briefly. As she matured and ascended to the throne, the influence of the temporary continued to shape her behavior and policies. The lack of love and security in her childhood made Mary a rigid, conservative ruler, absolute in her religious convictions. Her power served as a shield to protect what she feared losing most: faith, honor, and total control. Every political decision she made, from marrying Philip II to stabilize her court to persecuting Protestants, reflected fear of loss and reaction to past trauma, rather than strategy or reason. The 2 false pregnancies Mary endured exemplify this tragedy. They were not merely personal despair but direct consequences of being molded by temporary history, fear of dynastic collapse, anxiety about leaving no heir, and social pressures bearing down on a solitary queen. What was a temporary political solution in her childhood, the safeguarding of the throne, became lifelong pressures, forcing her to live under relentless misfortune and stress. Tragically, Mary could not escape this cycle. Her power was the product of history, and history, with her father's temporary solutions, had confined her within a framework of pain. She could not undo past decisions, she could only react. And her reactions were often harsh: religious persecution, imposition of laws, consolidation of power through fear. The result, Mary Tudor became the embodiment of wounded authority, a powerful yet lonely queen, strict yet sorrowful, ruthless yet shaped by personal suffering. Mary Tudor's tragedy also demonstrates a larger reality. Temporary power can leave permanent consequences. What Henry VIII regarded as decisions meant only to solve short-term problems, marriage, succession, religion, did not vanish when the immediate issues were resolved. Instead, they profoundly shaped Mary's life and the way she ruled a nation. The temporary, reinforced by social inertia, personal psychology, and tradition, became a long-lasting force, shaping both policy and destiny. Moreover, Mary's story clearly illustrates the link between the provisional and tradition. Decisions initially made as immediate solutions gradually became courtly norms: absolute royal authority, compulsory religion, pressure for heirs, all became standards. Mary could not change them, because once temporary decisions become tradition, they are rarely broken, even if their origins were coincidental and provisional. Another poignant aspect is how personal character is shaped by the temporary. Childhood traumas, losing her mother, isolation, political pressure, affected not only her emotions but also her worldview, her decision-making, and her handling of power. Mary became the product of temporary history but also a living witness to the power of what seems minor. A fleeting decision by her father created a queen, yet also imposed lifelong tragedy. Finally, Mary Tudor's tragedy reminds us that the temporary is never truly temporary in history. A decision, a solution, or a small action, when applied within the context of power, social inertia, and strong belief, can alter the fate of an individual, a family, or even a nation. Mary's story vividly demonstrates that history is shaped not only by grand wars or conspiracies but also by small, provisional decisions, seemingly harmless, yet enduring far longer than we ever imagined. Mary Tudor was more than a queen. She symbolizes how the temporary in politics, power, and personal history can shape destiny. Her life is a living lesson: when the temporary meets inertia and tradition, it ceases to be temporary. It becomes destiny, leaving an indelible mark on history. And understanding Mary Tudor's tragedy prepares us to move into the next story, where great ideals, and dreams of cultural harmony, are likewise tested by the provisional and social inertia, as in the case of Alexander the Great. And having witnessed the full tragedy of Mary Tudor, a life molded by her father's temporary decisions and political pressures, we begin to understand that her suffering did not stop at the loss of personal freedom or authority. Mary's pain ran deeper, permeating every layer of her soul, shaping the identity of a queen whose every decision, every emotion, bore the marks of past wounds. And from here, we move to the next chapter. Mother lost, name lost, position lost, the making of a wounded queen, where Mary's journey to queenship is examined through the lenses of psychology, emotion, and politics, revealing the long-lasting impact of temporary circumstances. Mary Tudor was not merely a name in history, she was the living embodiment of a person deformed by circumstance and power. Early traumas, losing her mother, losing her name, losing her place in the family and court, formed a queen with a complex inner life. Strong yet lonely, determined yet insecure. From a young age, Mary witnessed Henry VIII's provisional decisions shatter the family order. Her mother was stripped of the queenly title, her father's marriage policies rendered her illegitimate, and her place in the line of succession was destabilized. Each loss, seemingly temporary, left deep scars, becoming the foundation of the personality of a future queen. The loss of her mother was the first and most profound wound. Catherine of Aragon, Mary's mother, was not only a source of love but also a symbol of stability and religious faith. When she was stripped of power and separated from her child, Mary lost her protector, her first spiritual anchor. This loss forced her to grow up in loneliness, anxiety, and insecurity. A child deprived of love learns to protect herself with toughness, internal discipline, and self-reliance. During these formative years, Mary learned to live with solitude and fear, forming the psychological bedrock of a resolute, yet guarded leader. The loss of her name, or more precisely her legal identity and status in the line of succession, intensified her sense of isolation. Mary was labeled illegitimate when her father annulled his marriage to Catherine. In the eyes of the court and society, she was no longer the king's lawful daughter, rendering her rights, opportunities, and protections ambiguous. A name, a symbol of power, status, and honor, became an emblem of deprivation, a loss Mary would carry her entire life. The loss of position within the family and court meant losing direct authority and status in her own life. Mary could not influence crucial decisions regarding marriage, succession, or religion. She became a pawn in her father's political games, used to serve temporary power objectives, and forced to comply with adult decisions. This loss shaped a deeply wounded psyche. Mary had to protect herself, endure hardship, and internalize lessons on power and injustice, lessons that would later define her reign. From these losses, Mary developed a complex interplay of strength and sensitivity, power and solitude. Strength, because she had to protect herself from pain and injustice. Sensitivity, because every action and decision was filtered through memories of early trauma. Power, because she knew only by controlling her environment could she prevent repeating past harms. Solitude, because no one truly shared her deepest pains. This combination produced a unique queen, fearsome yet pitiable, strong yet vulnerable. The psychology forged by loss also explains why Mary became an absolute and sometimes ruthless ruler. Her harsh measures. From persecuting Protestants to consolidating power through fear, were not merely political strategy but reactions to psychological wounds. She acted to protect what she deemed irreplaceable: faith, honor, and authority. This protection often came with severity, for Mary knew that even a small mistake could place her back in childhood conditions, isolated, bereft, and powerless. These losses also shaped her approach to relationships. She craved love and understanding but was wary and guarded. Her marriage to Philip II exemplifies this. It was not motivated by affection but by politics, the need to maintain court order and stability. Mary's soul was torn between personal desire and political pressure, between emotion and duty. Her past losses made it difficult to open her heart, yet strengthened her determination to protect what remained. Furthermore, loss cultivated an acute awareness of temporary power and short-term politics. Mary experienced firsthand that every authority, guarantee, and relationship could be revoked by a temporary decision. She thus learned to view history and power through a long-term lens. Every act has consequences, even the smallest decisions can leave permanent marks. This awareness heightened her caution, calculation, and ability to maintain power, but also amplified psychological pressure and profound solitude. Mary Tudor's life demonstrates a crucial truth. Personal traumas, when combined with power and social inertia, can produce a leader of extraordinary strength, yet steeped in tragedy. Losing a mother, losing a name, losing position were not mere historical events, they were building blocks of character, shaping governance style, and forming the living tragedy of a queen. She proves that history is made not only by wars and politics but also by personal loss, suffering, and pain. Ultimately, Mary Tudor's story reminds us that humans are shaped not only by social and political circumstances but also by loss and deep-seated wounds. The provisional nature of politics, injustice in the court, and her father's temporary decisions molded a wounded queen, someone whose strength and tragedy were inseparable. Mary Tudor is not just history, she is a vivid lesson on how personal pain shapes power and how power reflects the scars of the soul. And understanding the formation of Mary Tudor's character through these losses prepares us for the next phase of her reign, where wounds translate into action, and personal tragedy merges with historical tragedy, producing a chain of events and lessons that posterity cannot forget. Having delved deeply into the formation of Mary Tudor's character, from early losses, loneliness, and psychological wounds, we now enter the phase where that personality is tested, expressed, and transformed into power. Mary was no longer a child shaped by her father's temporary decisions, she was now queen, standing before the throne, facing the responsibilities, pressures, and tragedies that power brings. It is in this stage, reigning in solitude, marriage, religion, and the tragedy of a queen, that we see how personal pain, memories of trauma, and isolation shaped her policies, governance, and decisions that determined the fate of the nation. Mary Tudor ascended the throne in profound solitude. Not only emotionally, but also in terms of power, faith, and her position. The throne did not grant freedom or happiness, it merely highlighted the deficiencies that had followed her since childhood, lost love, absent understanding, and the constant awareness that every decision she made would carry unpredictable consequences. This solitude shaped how Mary perceived marriage, religion, and power, the three pillars of the unavoidable tragedy of her reign. For Mary, marriage was not a matter of love, but of political responsibility. She needed a husband to stabilize the court, form international alliances, and ensure succession. When Philip II of Spain appeared, Mary saw not love, but a political instrument, a temporary measure to maintain order and protect the throne. The desire for heirs to secure the dynasty drew her into a vortex of despair. Her two phantom pregnancies were not merely personal anguish, but evidence of the immense pressure and isolation weighing on a queen. The provisional nature of political marriage, meant to solve an immediate need, had become a prolonged tragedy, shaping her soul and guiding her future reign. Solitude also deeply affected Mary's perception of religion. In an era where faith formed the foundation of society and authority, religion became her only anchor. As a child, she witnessed her father's policy-driven religious shifts and the fragility of stability. As queen, she resolved to uphold Catholicism at all costs. Yet this resolve was not purely rational or strategic, it stemmed from fear of loss, from memories of a childhood devoid of security and affection. The tragedy lies in the fact that loneliness and fear transformed religion into a tool of oppression. Marian burnings became her method of protecting faith and authority, yet inflicted suffering on thousands. This explains why Mary Tudor's policies were often extreme and absolute. A person deeply wounded, isolated, and misunderstood struggles to find middle ground. Power became a tool to protect herself, control her environment, and prevent past traumas from recurring. Mary ruled through fear, the fear of losing power, losing faith, and losing the stability she had always longed for, rather than through conventional strategy or reason. This made her a queen both revered and feared, tragic and strong. Her solitude also shaped how she viewed those around her. Mary trusted neither emotion nor loyalty, having learned that both power and affection were fragile. Major court decisions, from appointments to military command, were carefully considered, yet always marked by loneliness and insecurity. She relied on herself, a self-reliance that created strength but also deepened personal tragedy, immense power with no genuine companion, isolation even on the resplendent throne. The pressures of marriage and succession made Mary a figure both tragic and epic. Her 2 phantom pregnancies were not only personal failures, but symbols of the despair of a queen caught between political duty and personal desire. The temporary nature of marriage, intended to secure the throne, became a persistent burden, turning the yearning to be a mother into a recurring tragedy. Temporary political decisions of her father had drawn Mary into a cycle she could not escape, and this cycle shaped every action of her reign. Mary Tudor's tragedy also exemplifies the link between the individual and history. Decisions by Henry VIII or Philip II had long-term consequences for Mary, which in turn affected the entire nation. Mary became a queen in solitude, carrying childhood wounds, and her exercise of power reflected those wounds, firm, absolute, yet unhappy and tragic. Her reign was not merely a sequence of political events. It was a vivid demonstration of how personal suffering, power, and history intertwine to create tragedy. A particularly important aspect is how Mary managed faith and authority in solitude. Isolation made her keenly aware of the fragility of power, prompting extreme caution in every decision. Emotional and political isolation shaped her into a ruler whose every action bore the mark of fear and self-protection. This explains why her reign was both powerful and controversial. Strength was reaction, extremity was self-defense. From this solitude, Mary Tudor becomes a symbol of a profound historical reality. Power is not just authority, it is the burden of personal trauma, the reflection of loneliness and tragedy. Every decision, policy, and action carried memories of early losses, while simultaneously creating long-term impacts for the nation. Mary vividly demonstrates that history is not only written by wars or policies. It is shaped by the wounds, isolation, and fears of those who stand upon the throne. Ultimately, Mary Tudor's reign in solitude reminds us that tragedy and power are inseparable. Marriage, religion, and authority, 3 seemingly objective forces, became tools both to protect herself and express pain. Personal tragedy merged with historical tragedy, resulting in a reign both powerful and pitiable, remembered and condemned. Understanding this period of solitary rule prepares us for the next chapter, where personal tragedy and power intersect with grand ideals, when Alexander the Great's dreams of cultural harmony confront temporary realities and social inertia, revealing lessons about how even the greatest aspirations can dissolve once the individuals who create them are gone. After all the years of reigning in solitude, when Mary Tudor had faced the pains of childhood, the pressures of power, and isolation within the court, it becomes clear that every action, every decision, and every policy of hers was the product of a life marked by deep wounds. Loss, loneliness, and fear forged a queen who was powerful yet tragic, resolute yet ruthless. From this point, we enter the final tragedy of Mary. A life demonstrating how the temporary can destroy a nation, where personal fate, provisional policies, and historical inertia intertwine to produce consequences beyond control. Mary Tudor died in 1558 at the age of 42, leaving no heir, no true love, and a nation that was both unified and unstable. What she had struggled to build, a strong Catholic monarchy, political stability, and absolute authority, was only temporary. The temporary nature of political decisions, of power, and of early choices, from Henry VIII's era to Mary's own actions, produced lasting consequences. The dynasty she nurtured collapsed shortly after her death, as Elizabeth I ascended the throne and reversed all the religious policies Mary had painstakingly implemented. This story is a vivid testament that the temporary, when exercised in power, can produce consequences beyond prediction, even destroying an entire nation. A central element of Mary's tragedy was how temporary personal decisions became national policy. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain, intended to protect the throne and stabilize the court, was a short-term measure but carried far-reaching consequences: a temporary political alliance, diplomatic tensions with other European powers, and internal dissatisfaction within the English court. Her two phantom pregnancies were not only personal failures but also symbols of instability in the line of succession, creating enduring pressure on the entire monarchy. What initially seemed like solutions to immediate problems became the root cause preventing long-term stability. Mary also clearly demonstrated that personal tragedy can ripple into national policy. Loneliness and fear of loss made her a resolute and extreme ruler in defending Catholicism. The Marian burnings, the persecution of Protestants, were direct results of her fear of losing authority and faith. In Mary's eyes, these actions were necessary to protect order. For the nation, they caused suffering, fear, and deep division. Temporary measures, born from personal circumstances, became forces shaping society, illustrating that power and personal tragedy always go hand in hand, and a seemingly minor decision can have unforeseeable consequences. The temporary nature of her efforts also manifested in the Catholic unity Mary sought to build, lasting only as long as she lived. Immediately after her death, Elizabeth I restored Protestantism, undoing all of Mary's painstaking work. What were temporary solutions of the past, from Henry VIII's decisions to Mary's religious and marital policies, ensured that her efforts remained ephemeral, a fleeting phenomenon in history. This serves as vivid proof that temporary political measures can destroy ideals, ambitions, and even the fate of a nation. Mary Tudor left a profound lesson on the long-term impact of temporary decisions on individual and national life. Her childhood experiences, stripped of rights, isolated, forced to obey her father's decisions, not only shaped her character but also guided her policies as queen. Personal tragedy became political tragedy. A queen's power reflected pain, loneliness, and fear, and these factors shaped an entire nation throughout her reign. Mary demonstrates that history is not just a series of events but a reflection of personal wounds and the effects of the temporary. Her story also emphasizes the inertia and power of tradition. Decisions that were initially temporary solutions to immediate problems were maintained and reinforced over time, becoming norms, policies, and ultimately historical burdens. It was not just Mary, but the entire court and nation that were affected by the prolonged consequences of temporary decisions. Thus, we see that history is a long chain of temporary choices, each generating ripple effects, each producing new consequences, and that the temporary can become a destructive or irreversible force. Another important aspect is how Mary exercised power in the context of personal tragedy. Power was not merely political authority. It was a tool to protect herself, control her environment, and prevent past traumas from recurring. Yet the way she wielded that power, rooted in fear and loneliness, led to extreme policies, causing suffering among her subjects and increasing instability. This is a crucial lesson: personal power, if not tempered by reason and compassion, can turn the temporary into a national tragedy. Ultimately, Mary Tudor's tragedy reminds us that history and human life are closely intertwined with the temporary. Temporary decisions, short-term pressures, and personal trauma can leave lasting marks. A life, like Mary's, demonstrates that the temporary affects not only the individual but can also destroy an entire nation. Her story shows that history is not always written by grand strategies or power plays. Sometimes it results from temporary choices, fear, and personal wounds magnified across society. The conclusion of Mary Tudor's tragedy sets the stage for another story, opposite yet parallel in its lessons on temporariness and consequences, Alexander the Great and the Dream of East-West Harmony, where even grand ideals, pursued with genius vision, must confront temporary realities and social inertia. Understanding Mary's tragedy allows us to see that the temporary does not only destroy. It tests every ideal, and only those who endure and are fortunate enough can turn a dream into reality. And as the personal tragedy of Mary Tudor closes, leaving the lesson that the temporary can destroy an entire nation, history opens another chapter, opposite yet resonant in its exploration of power and the fragility of ideals, the story of Alexander the Great and the Dream of East-West Harmony. If Mary serves as evidence that personal power and pain can turn the temporary into lasting tragedy, Alexander stands as proof that even the grandest ideals, born of genius vision, are vulnerable to social inertia, political realities, and the transient nature of authority. His dream of cultural harmony was not merely a political goal or military strategy. It was a profound belief that diverse civilizations could coexist, that nations could unite, and that power could be wielded to build lasting cohesion. Yet history shows that this dream existed only through Alexander's presence and power, and when he departed, the temporary immediately reasserted itself, unraveling everything. Born into the powerful and ambitious Macedonian family, Alexander the Great was not only a master conqueror but also an idealist. While many kings focused solely on territorial expansion or consolidating personal authority, Alexander envisioned a world in which diverse cultures could coexist in harmony. From Macedonia to Persia, from Greece to Egypt, he sought not merely conquest but a cultural alliance, where religion, language, marriage, and political authority were intertwined to construct a new world. In theory, this dream was grand and almost prophetic. In reality, it relied on temporary conditions. Personal strength and the direct influence of Alexander himself. One of the clearest symbols of this dream was the Susa weddings, where Alexander arranged marriages between hundreds of Macedonians and Persian princesses and nobles. This was a brilliant solution to create bonds, reduce tensions, and build loyalty across cultures. Yet it was also temporary. The cohesion and alliance depended entirely on Alexander's presence, prestige, and absolute authority. Once he was gone, everything collapsed. Husbands abandoned alliances, Persian princesses were assassinated, Macedonian generals deserted, and the dream of harmony, however brilliant, lasted only as long as his power. Alexander not only faced challenges from social inertia but also from the transient nature of power and human loyalty. Whereas Mary Tudor had to wield power to protect herself and her religion, Alexander used his authority to build a new world, only to realize that even absolute power was temporary. Macedonian generals, accustomed to traditional and decentralized power, struggled to maintain loyalty to the cultural changes Alexander envisioned. Temporary solutions, such as marriages and territorial integration, depended entirely on Alexander's personal influence. With his absence, everything immediately fell apart. This is clear proof that the temporary nature of personal power, even when used for noble ideals, can shatter the grandest dreams. Another aspect of the East-West harmony dream was the clash between entrenched cultures. Alexander sought coexistence between Macedonia and Persia, Greece and Egypt, but history and culture imposed deep-rooted barriers. Customs, beliefs, and political habits entrenched over centuries could not be easily changed by one individual. Temporary measures, even absolute power, could not eliminate these barriers. Upon Alexander's death, these long-standing forces re-emerged strongly, dismantling the dream he had painstakingly nurtured. Alexander also demonstrates that the temporary resides not only in power but also in human perception and behavior. All grand ideals, no matter how inspired, are easily tested by reality, ambition, and fear of loss. Macedonian generals, once free from Alexander's direct control, immediately betrayed the alliances he had built. Subject peoples reverted to old habits when the force of enforcement vanished. This illustrates that even perfect visions are temporary if not anchored in sustainable social, cultural, and political structures. Temporariness was also present in the interplay between ideals and strategic realities. Alexander understood that maintaining harmony required decisive action and extraordinary measures, political marriages, cultural assimilation ceremonies, and temporary centralization of power. Yet these measures existed only within the scope of his personal authority. When he died, all temporary constructs lost power, and the dream of harmony collapsed. This is a profound lesson on the limits of personal authority and the fragility of ideals without enduring foundations. Like Mary Tudor, Alexander the Great illustrates the power and fragility of individuals in history. Mary wielded power to protect herself and her faith amid personal tragedy. Alexander wielded power to build an ideal of cultural harmony under absolute authority. Both demonstrate that personal power, no matter how strong and decisive, is constrained by temporariness, and that the consequences of such decisions can extend far beyond the individual, affecting nations and civilizations. The difference is that Mary exemplifies how the temporary can destroy, while Alexander exemplifies how the temporary can destabilize even the greatest ideals. Finally, Alexander's East-West harmony dream raises questions about the real value of grand ideals. Despite victories, conquests, and creative measures to unite cultures, the dream existed only during his lifetime. Upon his death, everything fell apart, reminding us that even the greatest ideals cannot escape temporariness if not supported by enduring systems and structures. Alexander demonstrates that genius, absolute power, and strategic vision alone cannot overcome the transience inherent in personal authority and social inertia. Understanding Alexander's story provides a remarkable contrast to Mary Tudor. The temporary can destroy, but it can also destabilize the loftiest ideals. Both narratives teach that power, history, and personal tragedy are inseparable, and that the temporary, whether manifested in authority, ideals, or policy, can shape the destiny of both individuals and nations. By reflecting on both Mary Tudor and Alexander the Great, we truly grasp the strength and fragility of history, where transience and inertia persist, whether in the light of personal tragedy or grand ideals. And as the story of Alexander the Great, the dream of East-West harmony, paints a vivid picture of power, ideals, and transience, we arrive at the final chapter of this journey, the Susa weddings and the harsh truth: great ideals can crumble faster than a season. If Mary Tudor stands as evidence of the destructive power of temporary decisions, and Alexander embodies the limits of grand ideals in the face of social inertia, then the Susa weddings are the specific, vivid moment where ideals meet reality, where the dream of harmony is tested and ultimately reveals its astonishing fragility. This was not merely a historical marriage event, but a living lesson that even the most brilliant works, born of intellect, vision, and absolute power, can vanish in an instant if not anchored in a durable foundation. Held in the ancient city of Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire, the Susa weddings represented one of Alexander's most symbolic efforts to realize his East-West harmony dream. Hundreds of Macedonians were married to Persian princesses, nobles, and leaders, forming a massive matrimonial alliance, a symbol of cultural, political power unification. In theory, it was a perfect solution. it reinforced Alexander's authority while fostering loyalty and long-term harmony among peoples. In reality, however, the entire event relied entirely on Alexander's personal power and absolute prestige, and this fragility quickly became evident upon his death. During the weddings, the space overflowed with splendor, ritual, and symbols of power. Yet it was precisely in this splendor that the temporary nature was concealed, the marital alliances, the belief in loyalty, and the idea of a harmonious society existed only due to the authority of one man. As long as Alexander lived, these temporary measures functioned smoothly, but their inherent transience preordained their fragility. Immediately after his death, everything collapsed. Macedonian generals divorced their Persian wives, princesses were assassinated, and the dream of harmony, seemingly durable, dissolved in an instant. The Susa weddings became a vivid emblem of a harsh truth: even the greatest ideals, perfect on paper, cannot escape the temporary nature of power and human loyalty. Significantly, the Susa weddings demonstrate the limits of personal power against social and historical inertia. Alexander could orchestrate events, implement creative solutions, and maintain temporary order, but he could not completely change human nature or long-standing history. Macedonian generals, accustomed to traditional authority and their own values, struggled to accept these matrimonial alliances as a long-term norm. Persian princesses and nobles, though married to Macedonian leaders, retained their cultural identity and habitual practices. When the individual pillar, Alexander, was removed, everything he had built became ineffective. This provides clear evidence that the value of great ideals depends on sustainable mechanisms, not merely on personal power or prestige. The Susa weddings also reveal the temporary nature of strategic solutions. Alexander established mass marriages to reduce political tension and create harmony, but these solutions were inherently temporary. They relied on immediate loyalty, personal authority, and dependence on prestige. When that prestige vanished, all solutions became meaningless. This teaches a vital lesson: any action, no matter how logical or perfect it appears, can disintegrate if not supported by long-term social, cultural, and political structures. Another factor amplifying the harshness is human nature and individual character. The loyalty of Macedonian generals was unstable. The Persian princesses, though married by royal command, remained influenced by family, culture, and personal interests. These uncontrollable personal factors became forces that shattered great ideals once the temporary conditions disappeared. This reality reminds us that power and ideals, however grand, cannot endure without collective awareness, sustainable values, and stable social mechanisms. The Susa weddings also highlight the contrast between expectation and reality. Alexander hoped the marriages and alliances would maintain long-lasting harmony, but in reality, everything existed only while he lived. This failure stemmed not only from personal power but from the temporary nature of the solutions. Diplomatic and matrimonial measures were tools meant to work temporarily and could not alter long-established historical and cultural structures. When the temporary ends, the dream of harmony collapses, emphasizing that great ideals must confront harsh realities. From a historical perspective, the Susa weddings demonstrate the fragility of personal dreams in the face of history. Alexander's dream of harmony, even born of intellect, power, and genius, was insufficient to withstand social inertia, human nature, and the inherent transience of personal authority. The lesson is clear: all ideals, however great, can crumble faster than a season if not reinforced by enduring mechanisms and stable societal foundations. A particularly striking aspect is its parallel with the tragedy of Mary Tudor. Mary used power to protect herself and her faith amidst a deeply wounded personal context. Alexander used power to pursue cultural harmony under absolute authority. Both faced the transience of power, Mary saw personal authority unable to maintain long-term order, Alexander saw personal authority unable to sustain his dream of harmony. In both cases, the temporary determined the outcome. With Mary, it destroyed; with Alexander, it dismantled ideals. Both demonstrate that history, power, and ideals are always influenced by temporariness and social inertia. Finally, the Susa weddings remind us that great ideals do not endure solely through intellect, strength, or personal authority. Alexander's East-West harmony dream, brilliant and symbolic, existed only in the brief moment of personal power and collapsed as soon as the temporary conditions ended. The final message is clear: in history, the temporary always exists, and even the greatest ideals must confront the fragility and harshness inherent in the nature of power and human behavior. Concluding the story of the Susa weddings, we extract a vital lesson: every dream, no matter how grand, can fall without a sustainable foundation. Personal power is temporary, and history, like human life, is inseparable from transience and inevitable inertia. This serves as the perfect conclusion to the series of stories about temporariness in history, from Mary Tudor to Alexander the Great, reminding us that every action and decision, large or small, carries the potential to shape or destroy destinies, and that the temporary is perhaps the most invisible yet powerful force in human history. As our journey through the medieval world comes to a close, we confront a strange and haunting truth: many things created to be temporary, from laws and customs to personal or political decisions, end up lasting far longer than intended, shaping lives and determining the fate of nations. From Mary Tudor's personal tragedies to Alexander the Great's dream of East-West harmony, history reveals that the temporary never truly disappears. It seeps into life, influencing people, policies, and cultures in ways we rarely anticipate. This video does more than recount dramatic historical events. It opens a deeper perspective. To truly understand history, we must recognize the power of the temporary, the inertia of society, and those seemingly small decisions that can change the world. Imagine that every choice you make today, even a temporary solution, might leave a lasting impact far beyond what you can foresee. If you want to continue exploring history's unexpected stories, full of intrigue, drama, and life lessons, don't miss the upcoming videos. Join us as we open the door to time itself, and discover that what seems temporary in history never really ends. It quietly shapes the world around us.